Hi, welcome to Working with Students with Anxiety and Phobias using horse training techniques. My name is Julia Montanay, and I am a certified therapeutic riding instructor, a licensed massage practitioner in the state of Washington, and a certified master life coach. So I started noticing several years ago that the techniques that I used for training horses were similar to techniques that worked both for myself, trying to deal with my own anxiety, and working with students with high anxiety. I've worked with a lot of students with high anxiety, both typical students and students on the spectrum or with learning disabilities or other comorbidities along with the anxiety. I think that because I've struggled so much with phobias and anxiety myself, that's probably how I ended up working with quite a few students going through the same thing. So let's see if we can get this to work. So what is anxiety and what are phobias? So according to the DSM-5, which is kind of the end-all be-all definition that the psychiatric and psychological community use, a panic attack, which is a very common experience when you have anxiety disorder. A panic attack is an abrupt period of intense fear or discomfort accompanied by 4 or more of the following systemic symptoms: palpitations, pounding heart, or accelerated heart rate, sweating, trembling or shaking, shortness of breath, or a feeling of smothering. The DSM-5 phobia definition is marked fear or anxiety about a specific object or situation, for example, flying, fear of heights, fear of animals, receiving an injection, or seeing blood. So a phobia is just basically a panic attack in the case when coming in contact with a specific trigger. So most of us here are horse people, I assume, and some of you have probably also trained horses. We're all pretty familiar with horses having certain triggers that cause them to spook, and people can have the same thing. Horses are so a horse brain is kind of similar to a human brain without executive functioning and kind of the frontal lobe areas that give you a sense of self-awareness and a sense of self-consciousness. So our subconscious mind and our reactions to things can actually be very similar to a horse's. We just have the added bonus that we can cognitively think through these things. That said, let's go on to the next slide. We can't always override what our subconscious mind is doing, just like we can't force a horse to stop spooking. A lot of times, if a person has anxiety, panic disorder, or phobias, they can't stop themselves or talk themselves out of having the reaction they're having. So what is happening in our bodies during a panic attack? So in our brain, we have these things called neurotransmitters. They're serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, and gamma aminobutyric acid, or GABA, which is much easier to say. And those regulate both our mental and physical function. Then we also have hormones which do similar things. And norepinephrine, which is also called noradrenaline, which is probably a term that is used quite a bit more often. That is actually both a hormone and a neurotransmitter, and it is made from dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter. So adrenaline is responsible for the fight or flight response, and it is released by our bodies when we perceive danger. So in the case of a phobia, like if you are walking into a room and you see a small, completely non-venomous spider that you're completely capable of stepping on and squishing, you are not actually in danger. But in the case of a phobia, something in our brain has sensitized our brain to think this is something that's going to kill us. And so your brain will set off the adrenaline and it'll set off the cascade of the fight or flight syndrome. And that's not something that, if any of you have ever been afraid of something kind of harmless, like a non-venomous spider or a garter snake or something that's just really not going to hurt you, then you understand that it's not something that you can control. So fight or flight reactions, for those of you who may have never actually experienced this, which is unlikely, but it could happen, those involve dilated pupils. The reasoning is it allows our eyes to let more light in. Pale or flushed skin, as blood flow is reduced at a surface area to add more flow to brain and muscles. Increased heart and breathing rates, which add oxygen and increase energy for escape or fight. And trembling or shaking, which can happen as muscles are primed for action. I actually didn't know that until recently. I wondered why people would shake when they're nervous. It seemed like it didn't have much of a purpose, but apparently that's our muscles' way of getting ready to act, whether that's to run or fight or whatever that may be. So I'm going to move this little screen here if I can. Oh, can't. So you can't really see it in the cartoon, but I'm sure that you have, you've been riding your horse and there's a puddle, or you've been walking your horse and there's a puddle, and the horse is like, I can't go through that. That's the same thing happening in the horse. It happens to a person that has a phobia of spiders who sees a tiny little non-venomous spider across the room and they're just completely freaked out and they can't be in the room and they can't go near that spider and somebody get rid of it. It's the same reaction. And well, one thing that I can say about horses and puddles is that horses don't have the same depth perception that we have. So, puddle shark is kind of fun to make jokes about, but the truth is, for a lot of horses, they really have no depth perception to be able to see how deep that puddle is. And so as far as they know, it's taking them to the end of the world. And their instinct is telling them, do not step in that puddle. Just like someone who's phobic of spiders, their instinct saying, get away, danger, it's going to kill you, even though it literally can't kill you unless you have a heart attack, which I probably should not even make jokes like that if someone really does have a phobia of spiders. So you may have noticed, if you've ever tried to train a horse to go through water, that if the fear is big enough, they will not follow the other horses into the water. And I actually was talking to someone now, at the regional conference when I gave this talk, and they brought up the point, is it easier to get the horse in the water if the rest of the horses go in the water? And it really depends on the horse. Sometimes I found that, that's all it takes. And sometimes it helps, but you still need to work with the horse. And sometimes it really does not matter. And the horse is like, well, maybe it's fine for them, but I'm going to sink to the bottom of the world if I step in that puddle. And you're going to find that with your students too. You're going to find that there might be the kid that's super terrified of getting up on a horse, but when they see all their friends get up on the horse and how much fun they're having, they're like, yeah, I think I want to try this. And they get up on the horse and everything's fine. And then maybe you have the student they want to get up on the horse, they're still freaked out, they can't figure out why they're freaked out, but their friends aren't freaked out, so they're going to stick with it and they're going to see if they can, feel a little bit safer and have more fun. And then you get the student that's just like, heck no, I see all my friends on the horses, they are all having fun, I don't know what is wrong with them and how they can do this, but if I get on the horse, I will die. And that's a really deep-seated phobia, much like, the horse that just sees all their friends standing in the pond and they're just like, I cannot get in the pond with them, I'm just going to stand out here and die alone before I'll get in that pond. So you can't talk the horse, you can't just force the horse into the puddle or the pond if it's that degree. You can whip them as much as you want. Chances are they're either going to turn and run away, or someone's going to come and tell you what a jerk you are for doing that, or they're going to bite you or something. But forcing your horse to do something that's that scary for them is not going to work. And the same is for your students, saying, look, Bobby and Cindy and Billy are having such a great time on horses. What's wrong with you? Get up there. All that's going to do for a kid with a phobia is make them feel like, what is wrong with me? There is something wrong with me. When the truth is, their subconscious brain is telling them they can't do it, telling them it's going to kill them, and they can't talk themselves out of it. And if you had a phobia, you couldn't talk yourself out of it either. That's unfortunately the problem with phobias, is that we cannot cognitively talk ourselves out of it any more than we can cognitively convince a horse that they don't need to be afraid of something. So that brings us to, what do we do with a horse that will not cross the puddle, no matter how many of his friends do? And what do we do with the student that's so terrified to get on a horse, and yet for some reason here they are at horse camp or in riding lessons, and they really want to get on the horse, but they're too terrified? Or maybe their family wants to go on a family horseback riding vacation, and they really, really want their child to come with them and have fun. What do we do with that? So desensitizing is what we do with horses, and basically it's the same thing with our students. So the desensitizing, that's a word that gets kind of a bad rap in both the psychological world and the horse training world, because a lot of people don't really understand how it works. So I got a couple of pictures here of trainers, that very well-known trainers, Warwick Schiller and Buck Brannaman. And another side is another really well-known trainer, Tristan Tucker. And what I like about them is that they teach what desensitizing really is. And what it is not is exposing the horse to something until they shut down. And that's kind of where the problem comes in. It's the same thing with a student or yourself, is you don't want to force so much of the trigger onto the horse or your student that they just stop feeling anything, shut down, just tune out, just disassociate and give up. Because that's not actually getting rid of the phobia. It's just causing the student to just leave and not be there. And maybe you can get them up on the horse, and maybe they'll just cry and shake, but you'll never get them on the horse again, because as soon as they get off the horse, they will be so traumatized that they won't go near a horse ever again if they have their way. It's the same with a horse. If you were to just manhandle that horse through the puddle, just somehow, that horse was like sweating and shaking and comes across the puddle and he's just like a wreck, and you're like, yeah, you did it. It's like, no, you actually just traumatized that horse to the point, if they're sweating and shaking, they're never going to go through a puddle again as long as they can have their way. That actually is called flooding, and that's where you cause the person or the horse to be too overwhelmed by the trigger. It's no longer desensitizing them anymore. It's actually resensitized them. And by sensitized, that means that your subconscious, or in the case of a horse, just them, because they are just kind of a walking subconscious. It means the subconscious has attached this panic to this situation. And so it's an attachment in a place that you cannot consciously just make go away. And so with the horses, what we do is we teach them how to have a good feeling in the presence of the trigger. And we're going to do the same thing with our students. And I'm trying to remember what the psychological term for that is. There's actually, this is, excuse me, a mode of therapy. It's actually like, there's CBT and DBT and psychoanalysis, and there is And of course, here I am during the presentation. I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head. Oh, counter conditioning. It's called counter conditioning. So when, and by that, they're just basically saying your brain has been conditioned to panic in the state of this trigger. Now we're going to condition your brain to be relaxed in when you're near this trigger. So how are we going to do that? So in the picture here with Warwick Schiller, he's out there with the, a lot of you guys that have seen natural horsemanship and stuff like that, they've got the flags. Flags can be a really good tool, or they can be just wildly badly used, just like all the other tools. So he's over here, he's touching the horse with the flag. You can see in the picture how relaxed the horse is. He's kind of looking, he's like, yeah, got that flag over there, but he's got his back leg cocked. He's got his ears in a really neutral position, and he's pretty relaxed. So obviously this is a trainer that's been working with this horse a lot, saying, hey, I'm going to touch you with this particular object, and you're going to see it's not that big a deal. I'm not going to overwhelm you. And one of the things you can't see in this photo, but I'm pretty sure was happening before he got to this point, is that when he was presenting this object that he wants the horse to be, desensitized to, he was making sure the horse was in a calm place. So to get a horse in a calm place, we have them move their body in such a way that it naturally will release calming neurotransmitters. And you can do that by getting a horse to stretch their neck out, lower their head, lift their back. That will actually release the neurotransmitters to help the horse calm their body. And this is why, if you've seen, if you're out on a trail ride, and you may have even been taught to do this, that if your horse is getting really spooky, ride them in a small circle. And that's not because people used to say, oh, well, it's because it gives them something to do or something to think about, takes their mind off of it. Well, yeah, it probably does to a certain degree. But what it's doing is that when a horse goes in a small circle and they're bending correctly, they're going to want to lower their head. They're going to want to stretch their neck out. And when they do that, that's when it releases the neurotransmitters to calm their body. So if you put a horse into that position in front of one of their triggers and they're not overwhelmed, it's just a little bit of trigger, they're going to associate, oh, I'm a little bit relaxed around this trigger. And it's not going to go away immediately. It's not like, oh, well, all my life I've been terrified of puddles, and then I had like this split second where I was relaxed around them. That's not going to override it immediately. But the more you take the horse into that position and go, hey, look, we're in a relaxed place, we're feeling good, we're feeling calm, and oh, there's a puddle. Yeah, I'm feeling calm. Okay, now we're away from the puddle before the horse can get all jacked up about, oh, there's a puddle. So if you see, one of the things I like, if you ever get a chance to watch some of the Tristan Tucker, some of his training videos, is he teaches horses when they're in a stressful situation that they want to put their body in that position. The horse actually becomes accustomed to, I'm feeling stressed. I want to stretch my neck out. I want to lower my head because I know this will calm me down. And so, as he puts it, he always says he's, teaching the horse to make the right choices. And that way you don't just have a horse that is now no longer, oh, I'm not freaked out about that flag on the end of that stick. Oh, I'm not freaked out about you waving that tarp. Well, that doesn't mean that we're going to go out on the trail and something isn't going to happen that's going to spook the horse. You can't really, you can't really make up every little thing that can happen that can spook a horse. So the best thing when you're trying to teach a horse not to be spooky is to teach them how to calm themselves. And this is how we're going to calm ourselves. And this is how we're going to see something scary, put our body into a place where we can calm down and listen to our rider or our handler or whoever's leading the pack. or listen to the horse that's in front of them, who hopefully is not smoking. So it's the same with our students, is we don't just want to try and say, okay, we're going to get you to the point where you're no longer afraid to get up on the horse. We're going to teach them, this is how you calm down when you're faced with something that's really, really scary. This is how you can calm your body. So let's see, this might be on the next slide. Oh, here we go. I jumped ahead. So some of the things that we can teach people to do for helping them calm themselves. We don't really have a body position the way the horses do, but breathing, taking full deep breaths and filling up your lungs so that your body and your blood can have the actual oxygen. Usually I have an audience. All right. So if you're watching this video, I want you to take a really deep breath. Just take a moment and see if you can notice where you took the deep breath. Now, if you're stressed out, which you're probably not at this moment, but when you're in a stress situation, your breathing gets a lot more shallow. And so when someone says, take a deep breath, you're going to take what would be basically a shallow, deep breath, most likely, which means you're going to breathe right up into here. And your lungs are down here. So you're getting some oxygen in your lungs. You're not going to suffocate. But if you really want to get a lot of oxygen into your lungs, you need to breathe into your full lungs. So one way to try and do that is put your hand down to your thumbs right on your belly button. So it's just below your belly button. And breathe down into your hand. Make sure that part of your body moves out, so it's not just your chest. And when you do that, you're getting a lot more oxygen into your lungs, and you're getting a lot more oxygen into your blood. You're getting more oxygen to your brain. When that happens, that's going to change the neurotransmitters in your brain. You actually can stop a fight or flight reaction. It's a lot easier to stop it before it happens. Once it's happening, you can kind of ride it out and lessen it, but it's, it's kind of a cascade. Once it starts, it's a little harder to stop. But another thing to remember is once it starts, it is going to stop. Your body is not going to stay in panic forever. And it's actually probably not going to stay in panic for very long, because it's just not sustainable. And if there's no real danger, it's not going to keep panicking. Now, that said, if someone comes and puts a spider on your lap and you're phobic of spiders, you will probably keep panicking initially until someone takes the spider off your lap or you fling it across the room and run away. That, again, is the flooding. And then you're just not going to want to even try to get over your spider phobia after that, probably, though I would recommend you do, because it's cool to get over phobias. But if you're scared of something and you leave that situation, you see the spider, you walk out of the room, the panic is not going to keep going. It's just not physically possible for your body to keep in panic. But if you start to feel it coming on, one of the things you can do is that deep breathing down into your hand, down below your belly button, and getting the oxygen levels regulated. And that's going to start bringing the adrenaline down. It's going to start balancing out your neurotransmitters and making it a little bit easier for you to relax. And that's part of the desensitizing for humans, is to just very slowly see that scary situation and then relax your body. Another way you can do that is to tighten and release muscles, like make a fist, release, make a fist, release. And you can do that with pretty much any of your muscles. And that does the same thing. It actually relaxes your muscles, which moves into your neurotransmitters, helps your neurotransmitters relax a little bit. Another thing you can do is anything bilateral stimulation. So bilateral stimulation means either side of your body. So actually, one of the things I've done when I've been really stressed out, and learned this in what's called EMDR, which is all about, it's actually a really good modality for PTSD and panic disorder. So that would be either this or either rubbing up and down. And both of those can actually completely change what's happening with your neurotransmitters. And it's a very, very good calming technique. And in fact, at the regional conference, I was talking about that and demonstrating that. And someone came up to me afterwards and said that their daughter had been at a school where there was a school shooting. And that was a technique that they taught the kids. And so a lot of the kids would do that, you were walking down the hall doing this. And I was really glad to hear that they had that kind of support to give them those kinds of tools so that they could go back to a normal life after something that was so traumatic, which is going to bring about, not a phobia, but just, completely understandable fears about going back into the school building on a daily basis. And so these are physical tools that you can use and you can teach your students to help them to manage and kind of control the physical reaction to anxiety. And then you can do that with ever so slightly, becoming more and more in contact with what might scare them. So I had a student who was, I used getting on a horse because I had a student several years ago who was terrified of getting up onto a horse. It was less about the horse and more about, she had just an incredibly huge fear of heights, to the point where getting up on the mounting platform was really overwhelming for her. And so it took 6 months before she finally got on a horse. And, it was stand next to the platform, look at the platform, imagine being up on the platform, walk up on the first step, go up on the platform and jump off really fast. And then it was standing on the mounting platform with her hands on the horse, standing on the mounting platform, leaning over the horse. And we took this in really small increments. And there were days where she just, she'd already gotten up on the mounting platform. She'd been petting the horse at her last lesson. And then maybe she came in one day and she said, I can't get up there. I can't go up there. I can't do it. And so, and that would feel a little bit like a setback, but then the next week she'd be back. Okay, I can do it. So it can take quite a while. So that's one of the things I think that I think it's really important that we remember, is that everybody has their own timetable. Every horse has their own timetable. Every student has their own timetable. And you might have a student that is just not afraid of anything, it seems like, and you might have students that are afraid of a lot of things. Some of them just go away really quickly. And you might have students that it takes so long and you just think they're never going to get over it. And it's really not our place to put a timetable on these things, because we really don't know what's going on in that person's subconscious. And that brings up another question that was interesting. And someone had asked, what causes phobias? What causes anxiety? What causes, and in a similar vein, what causes horses to act a certain way? And the truth is, we don't know. Everybody is different. To put a value judgment on the situation and say, well, I have this student who's terrified of getting on a horse. I'm going to assume, or I'm going to put a story to this saying, well, the student is afraid of heights because they fell out of their high chair and broke their arm when they were 2 years old. I bet that's what happened. Or there's dysfunction in the house and they feel out of control. So when they're on the horse, they're not feeling control. It's like, you know what? It really doesn't matter what the story is. And, we might even know the story. The parent might come to us and say, my daughter was kicked by a horse when she was 3 years old, but she really wants to ride, but now she's really scared of them. Okay, now we know why the child is scared. We actually have a story. But it doesn't matter what the story is so much as it matters how are we going to help empower this child to not feel the fear in the situation that, as long as they're educated on safety, is really not that unsafe. I mean, everything in life is kind of unsafe. But so I would encourage people not to get too caught up in the story. Besides that, stories are for therapy, not for therapeutic writing. It also in counter conditioning and in horse training, the why is really not the important part. It's the what is the solution that we're looking at, and that's kind of what our job is. And it might actually be good for a student to see a therapist, a licensed therapist, and talk about the why. And in fact, that's a huge part of equine assisted therapy now, which has become like a really important aspect of working with PATH. But as the riding instructors, we want to stay away from the why. We want to stay away from the story that is behind the behavior. And we just really want to look at what is the solution moving forward. And like I said, sometimes the why is so, for instance, I had a friend who had a daughter who was so terrified of dogs when she was 3 years old, and she got over it about her tweens, because her dad got a dog and helped her get over her fear of dogs. But I mean, it was just this massive, huge terror of dogs. She could not be around dogs, just huge panic attacks, climbing up her dad's leg, screaming, almost blacking out from terror if there was even a small dog around. And the only story they could come up with, the only why they could come up with, was several months before we started seeing this phobia. She had been at the park and mom overheard another mom say to a kid, "Don't go near that dog, dogs bite." And I actually think I know who that mom was. But anyways, that's the only thing we could think of that caused it. So phobias, we just don't know. And it's our brains are so interesting. And horses, they're the same way. Maybe the horse was abused, maybe the horse was neglected, maybe the horse had a terrible trainer. If we don't know that, if we don't know the horse's past, it's really better just to say, okay, let's not put a story on this. Let's listen to what the horse is telling us and let's move forward with it. That is one thing I've noticed in horse training, and I think it's also something that I've noticed with students, is that if we focus too much on trying to figure out the story, and we focus too much on what we think the story is, especially if we don't have all the information, then we don't hear the student in the here and now and what they're telling us about what they need. And it's the same with the horse, and the horses are going to be telling us, this is what I need, this is what I can do. And we need to be really focused on the here and now and listening to that, and where our students are at and where our horses are at right now. So on this page, as you've probably seen, we're talking about don't validate the horse's fear by treating them as though they're in a dangerous situation. This is just kind of horse training 101. You don't, if your horse, a squirrel runs by and your horse goes, ah, you don't go, oh my God, it was a squirrel. Oh, you say, oh, dude, yeah, that was a squirrel. Okay, let's go. And just act like no big deal. there's a lot of like an attachment parenting and stuff like that. We want to validate kids' feelings, and that's great. That's actually really wonderful. And we want to acknowledge that, yes, the child is terrified. Yep, this is terrifying. It's really a bummer that you're experiencing this horrible feeling of being terrified. But you want to stay in the grounded area that there is no danger. Now, there's no shame in feeling terrified when there's no danger, because that happens. It happens with phobias, it happens with anxiety, it happens with panic disorder. There's, you don't want to make a child feel bad because they're having a panic attack or they're too afraid to get on the horse or whatever. But there's a difference between saying, oh yeah, I know this is really hard. I totally respect that. But I know that you can get to a point where it's not hard, than saying, oh my gosh, it's so hard, isn't it? Oh my gosh, it's so hard and it's so high. And I can see why you're so scared. And I would be scared too if I were short like you and the horse was so tall. Oh my gosh, that must be terrifying. No, you don't want to go there with them. You don't want to go into the fear with them and make it seem like, you're right, I should be terrified. It's no, you're safe. I wouldn't put you in a situation that's dangerous. You can trust me. And I also know that you can't stop your fear right now. It's totally okay. I understand it's just happening, but we're going to get past it together and you can prevail over this fear. It's the same thing with a horse. You don't yell at them or anything like that because they freaked out because a squirrel ran in front of them, but you don't validate, oh my God, that must have been so terrifying. It's like, well, they are terrified, but the actual situation was not dangerous enough to warrant it. And that's an important distinction to make. And also, horses really don't care, but kids need to know that there is absolutely no shame in being phobic of something or being scared of something. I know that in the horse world, and I've spent a lot of time in the dressage world, more so than in the cowboy world. And dressage riders are your typical stereotype of what you call a cowboy, probably more so than cowboys. It's like, well, if you haven't left an ambulance, get up on that horse. And half the time you probably should have left an ambulance. But the whole no pain, no gain, only sissies cry. I mean, that's prominent, I think, in all aspects of the horse world. And it's really important to not get into that mode when you're working with students with high anxiety or phobia. So there's the extreme of, you poor thing. Oh, it's so hard. You poor victim. You don't want to go there, but you also want to really keep an eye on that cowboy mentality of, just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, get the heck over it and get on the horse. That isn't going to work either, because high students with anxiety and students with phobias, they're actually way tougher than most people because they are feeling all this terror and they're showing up anyways, and they're trying to live despite all this terror. So these are actually really tough students. It's just that for some reason their brain has been sensitized to panic in these non-dangerous situations, and it's our job as teachers to help them no longer panic and to help them get on that horse and start riding. Just like it's the horse trainer's job to teach that horse that they can walk across that puddle. They can trust their leader or their rider to take them across that puddle, or they can see the squirrel pop out and maybe they jump a little and then they go, oh, I'm going to lower my head and I'm going to relax and realize that was just a squirrel and I could stomp that little dude and there's no reason to be afraid of him. So these are things that it really kind of takes a while to get that balance, but it's an important goal to strive for, to get that balance of support without kind of enabling, and support without discounting that it is really hard for someone with anxiety. And on that note, never underestimate the power of reminding a person how courageous they are and how you believe they can do it. When someone is high anxiety, or they have panic attacks, or they have phobias, they've probably heard at least a few times in their life, and they've probably told themselves that they are a total wuss and they're not courageous and they can't do things that normal people can do. That completely untrue. And it's very important to keep reminding people of that when they're going through trying to get over and face their anxiety. There are tools to do it, and it's important that they know that we're going to teach those to them. And just because someone doesn't have anxiety, it doesn't mean they're more courageous than a person who does, if that makes sense. Anxiety is basically, it's like saying if someone only has one leg and they can't run as fast as someone with two legs, but they can hop on one foot almost as fast, that's pretty darn impressive. So it's important for people to know, students to know, if they're dealing with anxiety, that this is not their fault. They are not weaker. They're actually very courageous for facing that anxiety. And when they are able to use the tools to overcome that anxiety, that is so powerful. And it's important for them to know that they can do that. There is no such thing as a person who cannot overcome their anxiety or overcome their phobias. And there's a lot of internal messages, I think, with people with anxiety, myself included, that say, oh, I'm the exception. I'm that person who will never get over it. But it's just not true. It's just not, because of the way our bodies and our brains function, there are ways to overcome it. Let's see. Got not used to do. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing screen. No, I'm not. Go back to this. I apologize. I am not used to doing this, not in front of a crowd. So when I have people in person, when I have an audience, I usually ask if there's any questions. And then I also ask if there's anyone in the audience that actually has any phobias. And usually, like at the regional conference, there were. So, because I think there are more people than you think that have phobias. So my homework, if you have phobias or you have a student that has phobias, my homework for you is I want you to get really comfortable with some of the relaxation techniques, some of the breathing, the bilateral stimulation, which doesn't have to just be this. You can tap your legs on either side. You can tap your feet on either side. You could tap your head. That would drive me nuts, but somebody might find that nice. But I want you to get really comfortable with those. And I want you to really, that initially, outside of being near something that makes you anxious, and then I want you to see how it makes you feel. Does it make you feel more relaxed? And when you can get to the point where you're like, okay, yeah, I'm able to do this kind of stuff, also the contracting and relaxing your muscles. You can also try that one if that works for you. That one doesn't work for me as well, but there are people that it works really well for them. Once you feel like you've kind of got that, then, or once your student feels like they've kind of got that, then very slowly start introducing them to that which makes them anxious. So in my case, when I was getting over my spider phobia, I would relax and look at pictures of spiders, because I had that much of a phobia. I didn't even like to look at, like big pictures, like big close-up pictures of them. And then I got to the point where I would just go and look at spiders, you know, like there'd be a spider in a spider web. I'd be like, I'm gonna go look at this spider, even though it creeps me out. And, you know, I just did that over time while using the relaxation techniques. And I don't, I don't freak out when I see spiders anymore. I don't really have any, I mean, I assess whether they're poisonous or not. And I don't really want to go near them or if they, my thing is the ones that bite and it itches really bad. Like I assess if it's them, and if it is, I get rid of them. But otherwise, I just don't have that panic feeling around them anymore. And so that's my homework, is to start to do a little bit of the desensitizing with yourself or with a student that has anxiety, and take it very slow. Let your student lead you with their comfort level. I know that when I'm coaching, like coaching in dressage, when it's not in therapeutic riding, I tend to be a lot pushier because my coaches were a lot pushier. So they're, you know, I'd have situations where, you know, my coach would say, I remember one time my coach said, drop your reins and canter on this horse that was really, I did not feel, I felt that was really a hot horse. Anyways, I did not have confidence in myself, and she said I could do it, and I didn't want to. She was very harsh and said I had to do it. And she's yelling at me, drop those reins. So I finally dropped the reins, and I was so scared. I just started crying really hard. I cantered a 20-meter circle, crying my head off because I was terrified. But that's a different thing than anxiety or phobias. That wasn't a phobia. That was more of just this is scary. I don't want to do it. And my goal in therapeutic riding is I don't ever want to make my students cry. So, and you know, I would say I don't ever want to make my coaching students cry either, but it's different when you're coaching in a, like we're going to shows and the student really wants you to push them like that. And maybe in therapeutic riding, you will run into students. But in general, when you're working with someone that's getting over a phobia or anxiety, I'd say really kind of, you know, you're in charge, but really watch them for calling when this is too much so that you don't push them too far too fast. That's just really important in that kind of situation where we're trying to get over any kind of anxiety. I mean, it's hard for me to really, I mean, it's something I guess you just need to learn. My trainer knew that it wasn't like I was having a panic attack, and it was appropriate for her to push me that hard. And I kind of had made it known, you need to push me because otherwise I'm probably going to chicken out and not try these things. But you really want to see where your student's at, and don't push them farther than they feel like they're ready for to overcome challenges that, you know, you want to push them a little, but find that spot, like with the horses, where you're not flooding them, where you're just giving them that little moment of accomplishment. And that's when you know you haven't pushed too hard, is when the student goes a little bit out of their comfort zone, and then you see that, just like, I am so excited, I went out of my comfort zone, you know, I cantered without reins on this horse that felt out of control to me but really wasn't. That's when you really know that you've achieved your goal for that lesson, is when the student isn't traumatized by it. You didn't push it too far, but they just did that little bit to get their confidence up. And each time they do, it builds upon itself until one day they're not afraid to do this thing that they thought they'd never be able to do. So that concludes our presentation. If you have any questions, you can email me at julia@artforwardmovement. So it's ARTFWD movement.com. And thank you so much for watching this presentation. I'm going to try to end this now. Oh. All right. Goodbye, everyone.